and welcome back to the St Teresa Community podcast. I hope you don't mind us putting a little track in between these segments, but we thought it would be quite a nice way to break it up and give a little bit of reflection almost in that time of song. So, moving on to the next topic that we did briefly discuss before our break, and that is all about how does courage differ for different people? How can it vary? So, Steph, you have been mentioning this in a few of your points before we took our break. So, I'm going to invite you now to give your voice on how you think courage can be different for different people.
I think, well, the general view of courage and the meaning of it would be the ability to do something like frightening or doing something brave. But I think when it comes to courage, there's no right or wrong answer when defining the meaning of it. And to me, courage is in the little things and in the selfless actions, or in finding motivation or inspiration to do something, or to step out of your comfort zone and do something you're not usually um, willing to do. But to other people, I suppose it could be even in different aspects of life, and in it could be speaking to someone you don't usually speak to, or addressing your faith and coming to terms with it and discussing your faith with other people, which can be very difficult to with young people today. And it's not a common topic to talk about your faith and to talk about your relationship with God.
Mm,
But I think it takes a lot of courage to talk about your faith, and especially with other people. And also in the Teresa's community, I think faith is embodied through the selfless charitable acts and being able to address different groups in the school, or sometimes
mm,
even the entire school, which can be sometimes very daunting. So definitely takes a lot of courage to do that.
mm. Thanks for that, Steph. Maddie, in terms of, we'll pick up a point there that Steph made about the difficulty almost in addressing faith and the I don't know. I'd say it's kind of like a unique scenario that we are all present at a Catholic school. It's a Benedictine community, a community based on the Benedictine values of humility, discipline, and stewardship. But in terms of um, perhaps there could be a few difficulties there in addressing faith. Maddie, would you be able to relate to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think being in a Catholic school, we sometimes sort of overlook the fact that we're actually a Catholic school, which is odd, but it's sort of something that when I've spoken to people about their faith, they're actually not as open as they
Mm,
might have liked to be, even though that you're at a Catholic school.
mm,
You might not have religion on your mind, not just constantly, but if you're talking about it, you might not know how to interpret it, even though you're around it every day.
mm,
You tend to possibly overlook it, and I
mm,
think going to St. Teresa's really helped me to sort of like come up my shell a little bit and start
mm,
talking about it more. Because even though I was at the school for a few years before, it didn't really crossed my mind as much to be so open about it. So I
mm,
think going to St. Teresa's really helps you to sort of open up and become more confident talking about your faith,
mm,
especially for like young people who maybe don't feel as confident.
mm. No, well, I'm smiling with the words that you've both uttered there because a huge value of courage, almost a sub virtue of courage is honesty, and honesty represents the moral courage. And what you've both said there is, you've identified that being in a community where we accept that we're in a Catholic community, we're a Catholic school, and the opportunities that gives us is endless. But I think something great that St. Teresa community does is it highlights the individual missions that are going on every single day. So we look at the charity work that's going on that Steph mentioned. We mentioned last week with Sally and Sophie about the starfish boxes and the silly sock day. And things like that unite a school community through something so minor, but perhaps if they were done elsewhere, they might not see the full purpose behind them. But Maddie, what you've alluded to there is that St. Teresa's almost gives you that second opinion of, no, look what you're doing. Look at the value that you're adding. Look at the purpose that you're having. And, even being at those meetings where, every Tuesday night we're not going out in the community and, we're not going to soup kitchens or, but what we're doing is we're working towards events that can allow that to happen, can allow that outreach. And another thing that's, personal for you two and everybody in that group and everybody at Downside School is the fact that we can use this opportunity to use our courage, as Steph said there. We can have the courage to address our own faith and to challenge our own faith. And this is a prime opportunity for us to be challenging ourselves and have the courage to look at our faith and go, right, am I as connected as I want to be to God? Am I as connected to my community that God wants me to be? Am I as connected to my family that my God wants me to be? And you could go on and on and on. But I think it's important to say that, something that I said last week in terms of, what you could define your faith by. And, I mentioned what I want. And sometimes you might not even hear from God. You might not feel God. But that doesn't mean that he isn't there. And in a time like this, it doesn't mean that courage isn't there. If you wake up one day and you go, oh, my word, I'm having a bad day today, that doesn't mean that you're not being courageous. That it means there's an opportunity there to sign in. And by you two being on this podcast, you are showing courage in abundance. And it is so clear and so obvious that you are so confident in your faith. And in terms of being able to speak out like this, I think that's a huge milestone. I did ramble on there a little bit, so I'll bring it back down to Steph. Steph, would you agree with the sentiment of feeling courageous in addressing your faith in a social? Let's go for two scenarios. So we'll go addressing our faith in a social scenario in our social groups.
I would definitely agree that I would definitely say that it's difficult to address your faith in a social scenario, because although everyone, being a Catholic school, everyone may share the same faith, it's kind of individual to each person and unique and different in the way that it means to different people. But I definitely think that God has given me the courage to be able to speak about it, especially through St. Teresa's. That kind of motivated me to be able to speak about it. And I would definitely say I am able to speak about my faith in a social setting and discuss it with other people and be able to understand what God means to them and how God is present in my life and in theirs. So
I think that links beautifully to what Maddie said earlier in terms of, Maddie's telling us that she feels like she's come out of her shell in terms of her faith. And that's something so great that you're able to say, Maddie, because, as Steph just said there, the confidence in being able to speak openly about it is something truly unique. And it's something that I've only just come across. If I said to myself, a few years ago that I'd be, on a podcast leading discussions like this with like-minded people, I probably would have second-guessed myself. Because it's all about being able to step out and say, this is what I gain confidence with. This is what my faith provides me with. And as Steph said there, it is truly unique to each and every one of us. But as Joshua said, he told us that, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So in 3 different locations that we find ourselves in now, we are speaking openly and freely about our faith, which is, you know, a huge credit to the community and to the school community that we're all a part of. So, Maddie, my question to you would be, how so we'll put this on two ways. How does the community aid the spread of courage in our school community? So, how does St Teresa's aid that spread of the spirit of courage within the school community?
Yeah, well, leading on from what you just said about being around sort of like-minded people definitely helps. And I think if you're in a group with people who are reading the same passage as you, but not having the same opinions as you, sort of gives you like that comfort, but also that opportunity to express yourself. Even though you're reading the same passage, you have such different views and such different opinions. So I think it sort of gives you it sort of takes the edge off really, and makes you feel more confident being around people who are sharing not only your religion but possibly actually some of your own opinions, even though they're unique. It's sort of comforting to know that people are possibly interpreting it similarly.
Steph, how about you?
I would definitely agree with Maddie that it's nice to know that other people, although have different ideas about what God means to them and what their faith means to them, it's amazing to be able to share different opinions and look at it in different perspectives. And I think sharing my faith with other people helps me to strengthen my faith, because bouncing off their ideas of God kind of helps me to see God and my faith in a different light. So it helps me understand a lot more.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's, you know, one of those things that faith isn't just a completed journey once you have a charitable action to your name. You know, like the silly sock day stuff. You know, that's a huge stepping stone, and it, you know, in terms of offering charity and being purposeful, being courageous, you know, practicing fortitude. You know, especially at the moment in terms of where our courage lies and the situation that we find ourselves in, but, you know, trusting that God will be faithful to the promises that's been made. I think that in terms of the work that goes on within the community, it is almost like we almost have to stop and recognize the work that's being done on an individual level every week. So, you know, turning up there, even tuning in to that on a Tuesday evening, is a huge part of you know your journey in faith, because it's allowing, as you've both said there, different interpretation of Scripture. It's allowing the the voicing of echoes, you know, and being able to listen to them and to reflect on them. And I think that's hugely important, especially in a day and age where everything's kind of done on our mobile phones at the moment. You know, and even St. Teresa now is online, something that we took, you know, with great care, and you know, we looked after it with the eternal flame that would be burning in front of us when we were back at school. But now being online, it's perhaps more difficult to practice courage and you know, those gospel values that we've been talking about. So I think perhaps before we do wrap it up, Steph, is there something that you would be willing to offer the listeners in terms of if a young Catholic now was listening and they were trying to exercise or pursue courage, is there any advice or inspiration that you would be able to offer them?
I would definitely say it may be difficult to at first to always, you know, show courage and be brave. But once you find the inspiration from God and the motivation, you'll be able to reflect courage in everything you do and in your life. And I would say start small, and you can reflect courage in the smallest things. And it may be starting to speak about your faith, which may not be always easy for everyone, and speak about your faith with different people, and people perhaps you wouldn't normally speak to, and people with different perspectives, and people with different points of view than you. And that kind of builds up your courage and builds up your ability to accept your faith and to be comfortable with it around other people. So
No, thanks for sharing that sentiment there, Steph. Maddie, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, similar to what Steph said, you don't have to start with really big things, just small sort of steps of courage, because faith is really individual, and I think you need to really sort of link it back to yourself and what's important to you, and then start to sort of incorporate, other people's ideas and, things like that. So I think it's important to stay true to yourself, and really think about what courage means to you and how it's present in your personal life, and then start impacting that on others.
No, 100%. I think what you've both said there would offer great value, and I think if we add in what Maddie was kind of hinting at the end there, was acknowledging the small missions that you make every day, and the things that you achieve in your faith every day, and sometimes the smallest of steps is are the most purposeful ones, because they all do add up. And I think something as small as having a thought and counting that thought as a prayer, I think something like that. We've had Cassie mentioning as soon as she wakes up, the first thing she does is tells herself it's going to be okay, and then she makes herself a cup of tea. For Sally, it was looking after the new puppy and drinking mango juice in the morning. It's those things that all do add up, and they are all purposeful, because as Maddie just said there, they're all unique, they are all individual, and faith is an individual journey. And at the moment, we're at a stage where we've been put together. I think we're honestly challenging each other in our faith, and but also progressing each other, and bouncing ideas off each other, and practicing all these gospel values. In particular, courage today, in terms of courage is acting for the good, when it would be much easier not to do that. So as a last remaining thought, I think that'd be quite good to finish on. I think, the girls, did you have any music suggestions for our listeners today, in terms of relating it back to anything that you want, really? Anybody can kick this one off.
Yeah,
I've got two of you at once.
You go.
we're both eager. We've got some good suggestions. Well, I got one that's called Courage to Change, which really it's all in the name, and it's a really uplifting song, and it's by Sia. And I always listen to it when I need sort of like to be uplifted, really, and it's really inspiring. So yeah, I like it. So I'd give it a listen.
There you go. You got to add that one to the playlist, Steph. Steph, do you have anything to bounce back with there?
Similar to Maddie's, mine is kind of in the message behind it is in the title, and it's called "I Smile" by Kirk Franklin, and it really helps me to be positive on days where I'm not feeling so motivated or so happy to do things, and it just kind of helps me keep positive and stay on top of things. So.
Thank you very much, Steph and Maddie. It has been an absolute delight to have you both on the podcast this week. So thank you. No, thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for sharing your voice. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for sharing your inspirations. And I think for all those people listening, it's clear that you are practicing courage, and it's clear that if you did add an ear to this, lend an ear to this podcast, I'm sure you will find an aspect of courage to inspire you today. So thank you very much for listening, and as a last thought before we do end this podcast, in terms of a question to finish on, I think it's important to address and to think internally: are we preparing ourselves for the trial set before us? In terms of the way of loving the gospel almost demands that I will be courageous. And I think that's something that if I, when I do listen back to this podcast, I'm sure that sentiment there of the way of loving the gospel demands that I'm courageous will be apparent throughout all of the words that were spoken in this episode. So thank you very much for listening. Thanks again to Steph and to Maddie. Next week we will be joined by 2 brand new sixth form students to the podcast. But for now, we are going to finish with another little bit of music from the Rend Collective with Rescuer. God bless.